Welcome to WMNF 88.5 FM and WMNF.org. You're listening to the Tuesday Cafe. I'm Seán Kinane. Today we're going to talk about Florida's freshwater springs and how they're being impacted by development, pollution, and bottled water. About 2 years ago, opponents of a plan to allow a giant corporation to draw more water from Florida's pristine springs and aquifer suffered a setback. The food giant Nestle was working with a company called Seven Springs Water to apply for a permit renewal to take nearly 1 million gallons a day of water from springs connected to the Santa Fe River. And an administrative law judge ruled in favor of the permit applicants, contradicting staff recommendations from the Suwannee River Water Management District. Since then, Nestle has sold its bottled water division. We'll talk more about that and other springs news with our guests. Joining me now by Zoom is Merrillee Malwitz-Jipson, a resident of Fort White, Florida in North Central Florida, and a board member with the group Our Santa Fe River. Welcome to WMNF's Tuesday Cafe, Merrillee.
Hey, Seán, it's nice to be back. I'm just going to check my audio because I didn't have a microphone, just making sure that you can hear me.
You sound great. Can you hear us okay?
I can, yeah.
All right, great. Well, let's start with the group that you're with, Our Santa Fe River. Tell us about that group. What is it?
Yep. Our Santa Fe River is a group of volunteers that live and work in this area. They stopped 4 bottling plants back between 2006, 2007, up until about 2011 or so. It was not easy, but because they were able to stop those 4 bottling plants, they then went on to get involved with a lot of other land use issues that impact our springs. So we became a formidable group, challenging development projects that impact the basin, the entire basin of the Santa Fe River, not just the river itself, because land uses do impact from miles and miles away. So the bottled water, back then we were able to stop it. And so we thought that, of course, that we were going to take this challenge on with the plant that used to be called the CCDA plant on County Road 340 in High Springs. They got a permit many, many years ago. And so we were challenging the reissuance of this permit because our river is super low. It's highly influenced by water use in our basin, whether you, me, whoever lives and works around here that's using water, and especially corporate water, large quantities of water, and agriculture. We're definitely impacted by extraction. And then we're also impacted by pollution, and they kind of go twofold, hand in hand in that way. The solution to pollution is dilution usually. But I'm sorry, but at the same time, we don't want to see that pollution actually being injected into our surface water conditions that ultimately feed our springs. So the latest bottling permit is now going to go back to ADOA through a challenge that was brought forward by the Florida Springs Council. And that challenge will be heard before a Department of Administrative hearings. And that was even interesting because they had to go through an appellate process to get that to be heard in front of ADOA, Department of Administrative hearing. And they got it. They got an appeal, which is really extraordinary. So we're all kind of very happy and elated that we got an appeal to actually move forward with this particular case that was wrongfully, we feel very wrongfully, a permit issued on a protected waterway.
Before we talk more about that appeal that you were just referencing, when you say you thought it was wrongfully decided when the original permit was issued, that's because, in part, perhaps, because the Suwannee River Water Management Board staff recommendation was that the permit be not renewed. But then what happened after that? It was a judge said that it was able to be renewed.
Yes, the judge at the time, sorry, I can't recall that person's name, decided that the Nestle case, because Nestle was the one that brought that case forward for the Department of Administrative hearing based on the staff recommendation of denial for that permit back in March of 2021. And so, or I'm sorry, 2022. And so that judge thought that everything Nestle was saying to him anyway was relevant and important to the case, and felt that the Water Management District, the board members, should vote in favor of this particular permit, despite the fact that the district wanted to deny it. And the arguments that the district made were fairly a little weak and timid. They were talking about how much water do you need for the plant, how much can you possibly bottle there. And so they did get a reduction. They got a reduction. Instead of 1,125,000 gallons of water a day, they got it down to just under a million, which is 984,000 gallons of water a day. Still almost a million, no matter how you look at this. It's a million gallons coming out of the Devil's Eye complex, which is also Ginny Springs, Blue Springs, Rum Island, Johnson Springs, Jonathan Springs, Mermaid Springs. So all of this cluster of springs is exactly what needs this water. And instead we're filling it in plastic bottles and shipping it to the ends of the earth, and thereby increasing the plastic and the consumption of plastic and the disposals of plastic, while we're giving our water away for free. Seven Springs Water Company pays nothing for this water. And yet the natural systems and ourselves that live and work and are around here are subjected to their use, where we might run out of water, or we might have a time when we have drought where we can't be using our water. We people can't be using our water, which is fine with me. I don't water my lawn anyway. But the point is that they're still bottling. They're still bottling water, and everybody else will have to cut back when we get into these drought conditions, which we're almost at right now. Honestly, when you look at the Fort White gauge, it's extremely low. And my question to the Water Management District right now, in terms of this water permitting, is that you've allowed this to happen, and yet now we're at a really low point on our river. So when are you going to turn the bottle or the pumps off? Is there going to be a requirement for this company to turn these pumps off, since our water is so low right now in the Santa Fe River? Anyway, so the Nestle arguments that were brought before that DOA, the judge agreed with. And so in that context, the judge agreed and said, yes, this can be moved forward. But our Santa Fe River never got our day in court, where we wanted to bring up our own arguments about the issuance of this bottled water permit and why it was so bad. And number one, one of the biggest badnesses, it's not a word. One of the biggest problems with this is that the public spoke. And it's part of the permitting process. When the public speaks, we have at least two parts of this three-pronged test business that goes into issuing permits, and they have to, speculate on these three prongs about what matters, and what matters should matter about the public. And when the public speaks, close to 19,000 comments that were submitted to the Water Management District on this one permit alone, that's enough to turn the tide. That's enough to say, hey, the public doesn't want this. Maybe we should listen to them. But that was never brought into any of the discussions with staff. Instead, like I said, it was some reasons that they denied this permit that were not about nature, were not about the public. They were really about the mechanics of and the legal descriptions about whether or not this permit should be issued. Complicated, super complicated law. I mean, to sit here and work on this since 2019, our Santa Fe River have been working to get this permit denied, and we had all kinds of information in place. The biggest one in the room, the biggest line in the room that we wanted to bring forward was Seven Springs Water Company is a shell of a company. They don't own anything. They own this tiny little swath of land that really amounts to nothing. It amounts to almost a road. And so how did the state of Florida give? They get it for free, this water for free, Seven Springs Water Company. How did they give almost 1 million gallons of water away to a shell of a company that has an address at somebody's private home? It's not a physical address. The wells are located on the Ginny Springs campground properties. Seven Springs Water Company doesn't own those properties. And the family members all involved with this are related to Ginny Springs Campground. So it's all of this strong holding of environmental resources for profit, and while the public has no voice. We have no voice in this, and neither does nature when it comes down to the bottom rationale of why this permit should be denied. And you just look at the river today, which I did all week, and you can see that the water levels are low, and maybe taking 1 million gallons of water out directly out of the source water, the head springs of Ginny Springs and Devil's Eye Complex, and these other ones I just mentioned, is a really bad idea.
I want to remind people that our guest is Merrillee Malwitz-Jipson. She is a resident of Fort White, Florida, up in north central Florida, near where all these springs are that we're talking about. She's a board member with the group Our Santa Fe River. You're listening to WMNF's Tuesday Cafe. I'm Seán Kinane, and we'd like to hear what you have to say about Florida springs. And if you have any questions about water or bottled water or anything about the springs, give us a call here. The number is 813 239-9663. You can also email dj@wmnf.org. You can text 813-433-0885. All right, I finally got it. 813-433-0885 is the text number. So, Merrillee, you were talking a moment ago about how Nestle was involved in this permit issuing, but since then, there's been a major change with Nestle and its bottled water division. What's happened in the last 2 years?
So, no ego aside here, but we really feel that the deal that was struck between Blue Triton Holdings, who bought the most drinkable fresh water in North America from Nestle through the purchase of Nestle Waters North America, a subsidiary of Nestle itself that bottles fresh water around our North American continent, that when Ginny Spring, when the permit was issued for Ginny Springs, which is kind of how it's couched around here, when that permit was issued, that the deal was struck. The $4.3 billion that Blue Triton Holdings paid Nestle for access to the most drinkable water resources on the continent of North America now goes to, the access goes to Dean Metropolis and his two sons that actually happen to, the Dean actually lives in Florida, believe it or not, in Palm Beach down there. And we've been monitoring and watching the Blue Triton Holdings company since we first heard about this deal being struck. And so it's not lost on us that in July, shortly a few months after February, that the deal was done, this $4.3 billion. And then it got even more confusing for the public, because even on the internet, when you searched Blue Holdings, they were still tied, deeply connected, intrinsically, whatever, with Nestle. So Zephyr Hills, the bottle that of choice for your listening audience and most of Florida's, and everybody says, oh, it tastes so good. Well, it's proprietary, that they're adding certain trace minerals. They're also doing reverse osmosis at the plant, where all the plants where they actually do bottle fresh water in the state of Florida. It's never really spring water coming out of a system. It would be green with algae by the time it got to your grocery store, if that was the case. So, Blue Triton now owns the vast majority of the assets associated with Nestle Waters North America. And I'm with a consortium of groups around the country and also in Canada that monitor bottled water businesses in our countries. And it's shocking how that deal went down. That was a traded deal with a lot of borrowed money. And so there's investors involved, and there's these men involved, and it's a frightening situation when you can sell access that easily to freshwater resources. It's very frightening. They shouldn't be sold that way whatsoever.
And the most recent news, so even more recent than the Nestle selling its bottled water division, North American bottled water division, to this company, is that as you were alluding to earlier, the Florida Springs Council won their appeal for an appellate court to be granted a Department of Administrative hearing on the issuance of the bottled water permit by the Suwannee River Water Management Board members to Seven Springs Water Company. So you talked about that briefly, but that's kind of maybe big news, the most significant news that's happened maybe in the last couple of years since this permit was granted. So tell us more about that decision.
Yeah, it's a very interesting situation, because it actually puts us on the same side as the very antagonists in terms of the water management district. So the water management district staff and attorneys agreed that we should have this appellate process, that we should have an appeal. Because we did, Florida Springs Council had an in. It's very hard to get, in terms of environmental lawsuits, it's very difficult to identify yourself as having a reason to have the lawsuit. But we did, Florida Springs Council did actually have an in that it was 180 degrees different at the time that this water permit was issued. The staff was actually recommending approval based on a judge's opinion. So that's where things were different when the permit was actually issued, and that's why they had a point of entry at that point in time. And so the Florida Springs Council will now, in a lot of ways, be on the same side as the Water Management District, because I don't think they really wanted the permit issued either. I mean, based on their original arguments several years ago. And what's going to happen now with this case is going to be even more confounding, because in the past we were dealing with the Nestle attorneys because they were in bed together with Seven Springs Water Company. And now we're going to have to be dealing with Blue Triton attorneys. I don't know where the Nestle attorneys are going to be in all this. I know Seven Springs Water Company at one point in time had hired the Nestle attorneys to work for them to get their permit issued because Nestle needed the permit. But today, I don't know, does Blue Triton hire in that? I don't know how that's all going to work out, but it's definitely moving forward, and it's going to be before a Department of Administrative Hearing judge, and the Florida Springs Council are going to have their own arguments, which is really exciting because they don't have to be couched in the arguments that Nestle raised. These are going to be arguments based on the decision, the actual board decision that was made February 23rd in 2021. So, or 21. Boy, it's all blur. So yeah, it's a very complicated law process. Water law is complicated anyway. And it is exciting, and it does give us wind under our sails, the environmental groups that work so hard to challenge any development use permits because of how water laws are written. And this is actually to the whole point of this maybe this discussion, is that water laws do have really good regulations and rules, but the enforcement isn't there. And we may talk about other development stuff with this meeting here with you. But the enforcement is so hard to delegate and to manage that a lot of times the land use changes have already happened before the permitting has already been issued. We're seeing that more and more up here. We see development projects left and right, especially in Columbia County on top of the Ichetucknee Trace, where they're developing and they're removing trees. They're clear cutting trees because they think they're going to get their permits, and there's no rules about removing trees. And so in the end, whether or not they get their permits for building on top of a wetland or building on top of a waterway, underground waterway, because that's kind of how it is up here, a lot of underground waterways, they're already decimating the land. So the trees, the land is already devoid of trees. And then, you're sitting at this, I just did this yesterday, and you're sitting at this devoid piece of property with no trees on it anymore, even though it's on top of a wetland. And you're scratching your head going, how are the board going to even know that was a forested area for a wetland? I mean, that the forests are so important because they bring rain, and they also hold, the roots will hold soil, and so forests around wetlands are critical. And here we are, removing them for development projects. So it's going to get really interesting in North Florida. We're seeing lots of migration from the coastal communities that are seeing the storms and seeing the saltwater intrusion and seeing all the problems that they're experiencing with their freshwater supplies, algae, pollution, from huge runoffs of massive industrialized complexes. And so they're moving into North Florida, where there's a lot of empty land, a lot of water. I mean, we have a lot of water. It's this Florida Springs heartland. But how do we develop when the rules and regulations allow for some things and yet not others? And that's really where Florida Springs Council is basing a lot of their arguments in terms of their legal challenges. They challenged the BMAP to the Basin Management Action Plan also, and it also had to do with how are the laws written? How are the rules written? Why are we not enforcing them?
Well, let me remind people that our guest is Merrillee Malwitz-Jipson, a board member with the group Our Santa Fe River, and it's 10:25 in the morning. You're listening to WMNF's Tuesday Cafe. I'm Seán Kinane. If you'd like to join this conversation, you can call us at 813-239-9663. You can text 813-433-0885. Please sign your name, or you can write us at dj@wmnf.org. Merrillee, we got a text from the 352 area code, so up your way. And the person is asking, 1 million gallons a day, who and how is this monitored? I've seen the Santa Fe River dry up and many local springs are dead and dying, no longer flowing. Are there any mechanisms to stop pumping when river levels are low, which they are now? That's the question from the area code 352.
the Swanee River Water Management District does have in place certain times where they would require, I forget the codes they have. I think they have 3 different codes where you have to start limiting your amount of water being used. Where they do the monitoring for the bottling plant at Ginny Springs is actually in Ginny Spring itself. There's a little monitoring system at the backside of the cove entryway of Ginny Springs. And then they also monitor at the Fort White gauge downstream. Both of them are critical in terms of flows and levels, of minimum flows and levels. And we do have the minimum flows and levels, again, a regulatory framework to decide, how humans use the water in the basin and what's the best for everybody, including nature. And so I'm trying to get to the bottom of when there's a trigger point that cuts off the wells at the pumping at the plant on County Road 340 or the wells located on the Ginny Springs campground land. There used to be a cutoff. And now when I'm looking at the new permitting conditions that they just allowed for, it's nebulous. It's I'm going to have to get to the bottom of it with the staff members and figure out exactly what's the number cutoff. So I know that's not a very, it's just yes, there are mechanisms in place. And now you have to be the neighborhood watchdog and say, hey, this Fort White gauge is at 0.0 whatever, and you should turn off the pumps now. So yeah, that's what we're working on right now, is trying to be the watchdogs.
Well, thank you for that question from the 352 area code. Here's something this Alan writes in. He says he's a new listener. He says, horrible news about the water situation that your guest is discussing. It sounds illegal, undemocratic, un-American, and a perfect example of how capitalism and democracy do not mix. My one comment is to simplify the presentation. So they're saying to simplify. So if there's maybe this will be a good chance then for you, Merrillee, to in a sentence or two, how would you summarize what's happening with the Florida Springs?
They're drying up. I give it 10 or 20 years in a summary. 10 or 20 years and we won't see them the way they exist at all today. We're seeing them change overnight.
And the reason that they're drying up is not just, by accident. There are things that we're talking about in this, like the taking of water for bottled water, like pollution. We haven't talked yet about pollution very much. So how is pollution impacting Florida Springs?
Yeah, we're seeing filamentous algae growing in all the springs. That's related to either dissolved oxygen levels or to pollution levels. Both are kind of similar in a sense, but not exactly. The scientists fight on that. So yeah, we're seeing at every conduit system, every sinkhole in our area, it gives it an opportunity. There's an opportunity in the Florida aquifer to have recharge. And so anywhere where these openings are on the surface of the ground, you're going to get infiltration. And so whatever we do up there, whether we're changing oil, whether we're fertilizing, whether we're throwing our trash out the window with crap in it, that's all going into our drinking water. And I think we can sit here and complain all day about the government and telling them, you got to fix this. We're responsible. If we can't figure out how to take care of our area, then the government's not going to do it for us either. I mean, I look at what I saw yesterday when I looked at all these basins, all these channels underground, all these underground, all the garbage that was piled up going into these aquifer systems. Study, go to the Florida Springs Institute, learn more, take their classes, go to the Florida Springs Council and read up, go to the Florida Phoenix and understand more about water. They write about water all the time. We have to be our own self-advocates. That's what I've learned. And that's where I've been since 2006 is in government meetings weekly. I took a break and it was nice. I guess I'm back again because I'm seeing development projects where we had agriculture issues on the Santa Fe River Basin. Now we're seeing huge, massive developments. And I know I'm running out of time. And the developments are more problematic in a lot of ways than even agriculture was. Yeah.
Our guest is Merrillee Malwitz-Jipson, a board member with the group Our Santa Fe River. And we're talking today on Tuesday Cafe about Florida's freshwater springs. I'm Seán Kinane. It's 10:30 in the morning. And Merrillee, I did ask you to come on until about 10:30. Are you able to stay on longer? I still have some questions for you.
Sure.
All right, great. Okay. Thank you. So, we've talked a lot about how bottling water is impacting the springs here, but what are people's alternatives to using bottled water?
Filter, a filter, just like they do. You think these bottling plants are filtering their water? People are misinformed. Filter your water. Get whatever brand you want. I don't want to be branding on your station, but get a filter that filters right from your tap, and then fill it up in a jug or a jar and take it around with you the rest of the day. It's not rocket science. The idea that somehow drinking out of plastic is the answer to your hydration, man, get a life. Do something else. Go find a bottle that's metal, preferably, or something that doesn't leach into your drinking water system, and go find a filter that sticks onto your tap water. Easy. You don't need to be bottling, you don't need to be throwing things out. That's the even bigger nuisance with bottled water, is all of the plastic that I participate in cleaning up. I do a lot of cleanup projects on the highways, on the roads, and the sinkholes, and the rivers, and half of it is plastic. Like, in the next generation will be scratching their heads. I had galleries full of artwork about the springs, and part of the reason I have the springs gallery is to show you what it looks like today, is what the springs look like. And 100 years, 500 years from now, people will be having this stuff on their walls, and they'll be like, what did they think? What did they do? Why didn't they protect these things? These were such beautiful landscape treasures. And then knowing what the problems are, it's trash, it's chemicals, it's putting stuff on the land, it's removing trees, it's building in ways that we should not be building, and we shouldn't be bringing in a bunch of fill dirt. We shouldn't be jamming stuff into the ground to support your structures. We should be finding ways that we can build on the surface that don't have impacts into our groundwater resources underneath. And I built my own house. I learned a lot when I built my own house. I did not spray my house for chemicals underneath. I did not kill my soil. There's a thing called killing soil. Believe it or not, you have to spray it like 25, 30 feet out from your footprint where your foundation is, and out, to kill all the bugs and organisms that are on that space. We didn't do that. We build traps. We have traps. We do a lot of trapping. And now, trapping's interesting. Even the pollution that we're talking about, how the springs get polluted at the main intersections around North Florida, they are now using these filtration projects that are basins that hold a lot of water from runoff from development projects, because you get runoff from development projects. Water's got to go somewhere, and they're filtering it. And they're filtering it prior to it getting back into the Santa Fe River. This is happening in Alachua. It's a test project. I think they've had success. I haven't followed up with all of it yet, but those types of things, filtration is really important, but cleaning it before it filters is even better. And not using it at all is even the best.
Our guest is Merrillee Malwitz-Jipson, a board member with the group Our Santa Fe River. We're talking about Florida's freshwater springs on Tuesday Cafe. You can give us a call if you'd like to ask a question or tell us your experience with Florida Springs, 813-239-9663. You can also email us, dj@wmnf.org, or text 813-433-0885. Merrillee, on this show in the past, I've talked with experts about something called the Right to Clean Water campaign. So tell us what that is, and why people should learn more about it.
Yeah, that's a new thing. A little hard to talk about, a little confusing, and even me, as a huge advocate of the rights to nature and the rights for clean water, which is really what it's about, is clean water for nature. And for us, we're part of nature. It gives an opportunity for more oversight when it comes to projects like we're talking about. I mentioned earlier how hard it is to have a lawsuit. I've been involved with a lot of lawsuits trying to protect the environment, and it's hard to get standing. So this gives more opportunity for major impacts for a person to come before a legal situation and say, hey, I want standing because I don't want to see these thousands of acres be destroyed for a condominium, or whatever that is, whatever the reasoning is. And so it gives a chance for standing, for clear standing, to challenge development projects that impact clean water storage or clean water in the area. whatever clean water looks like. Natural clean water is really what we're at. So, so the right to clean water, not only is it for you or for me, it's also for natural systems. And there's a ballot initiative that you can sign on to through oursantaferiver.org or through some other entity that's pushing for this, which there are out of Orange County and other Brevard County, and there's a few other places, I think even Tampa and out of Gulf Coast in Fort Myers. And you can sign a petition and we can get it on the ballot to put it in front of the voters as a voter referendum for the 2024 election. So it's not about buying land as much as it is about having accountability to be the one that represents a right to clean water.
Merrillee, we have a couple of people on the line that want to ask questions. So let's go first to Clay in Land O'Lakes. Happy New Year, Clay.
Happy New Year to you, Seán, and to your guests, and thank you for all the hard work you've been doing to try to defend our water. That's a great job you're doing. I'm quite familiar with this. I'd like to make some points that people are usually not aware of. In the first place, all the fresh water in Florida belongs to the people of Florida. It's in the Florida Constitution. It's our water, and they're giving it away. I don't know how they give our water away, and somebody else is in charge of us to drink it. I've never been able to get SwiftMud to explain it to us in a reasonable way. They said it's like an agricultural product, like a watermelon. I go, no, it's not an agricultural product. So that's one thing. The next thing is that it's the uplands that are the greatest recharge to the aquifer, because they capture water and slowly allow it to move down through and filter the water into the aquifer. And uplands traditionally are the place where we're putting development. So we keep destroying the recharge that we have. The places that best recharge the aquifer. We also don't have a magnitude 1 spring anymore. They used to measure springs by their outflow, and we had like 9 magnitude 1 springs, and as far back as 2000. Now none of them flow at that rate anymore. That's how bad it is. It's really bad. And then we have the issue of, as she points out, all this development is going on where they get to do all these things to change the land even before they get a permit. I have it going on over here right now at my place. So we have to find a way, and I guess this constitutional amendment is going to be one of them, but it's already in the Constitution. She's right about the fact that the reason we go through all this is there isn't proper enforcement. There are already rules and regulations that should prevent this stuff from happening, but they're not being enforced, and they're not being enforced because of capitalism. And there's one other thing we forgot about as far as water usage goes. One of the worst waste of water is with our phosphate industry, especially Mosaic. The DEP used to say the solution to pollution is dilution. So they allow them to take that fresh water out of the ground, mix it with their affluent water they need to get rid of, till it gets to a point where they can then release it into our waterways. They use a huge amount of water. So we have it. And then agriculture. Agriculture is not the worst. If they use the right method in agriculture where they keep the water on the ground, that water gets used by the plants but soaks back down in the ground. But still, agriculture wastes a lot of water, especially when they're spraying it instead of laying it on the ground.
Clay, thanks for those points. I appreciate you calling in.
All right. Well, peace be upon you. Stay healthy, and y'all have a great new year.
All right. Thanks, you too. Merrillee, would you like to respond to any of those points that Clay brought up?
Yeah, he's right about everything he said. Commerce definitely wins out. We saw a board vote at the Water Management District last month on Tuesday's board meeting. I hadn't been there in over a year and a half, and I went and I stayed after the issue about the Seven Springs bottled water permit came on the agenda, and then I stayed. And then there was this development project. Perfect point to your story, Clay. Tens of millions of dollars is what this gentleman promised for allowing a variance to change from this particular region in the center of Florida by I-75 inland. He wanted to change his variance was instead of a closed basin, which is truly what this is, he wants it to be an open basin because somebody told him it was an open basin 5 years ago or whatever that is. It's not an open basin. An open basin would be something like draining into the Gulf of Mexico or into the Atlantic or some wide body of water. Truly, our area in here in the center of state of Florida is an inland closed basin. And so the Water Management District, the board, actually voted in favor of the variance. And so this man can build, well, he thinks he can build, he's not done yet, he still needs an ERP, but 11 large scale human uses, grocery store, hotels, stores, gas station, roundabout, a road work, directly on top of something called Clayhole Creek and Cannon Creek. Clayhole and Cannon Creek are part of the Ichetucknee Trace. Part of the Ichetucknee Trace feeds the Ichetucknee River, a beloved crown jewel of the state of Florida. And he's going to be putting this huge multi-million-dollar development on top of these two confluence underground water systems that will certainly end up collapsing or adding pollution to this water system, which is what the variance was about, was adding pollution through a 6-inch pipe that we had to hear about for 2 hours last week or whenever that was. So it is a problem. It's a problem. And I don't think our elected officials or our appointed officials in this case, these are appointees, understand that our resources are our value. That is the value. You take away our resources, we have dirt, which dirt can be nice, but we want the water to be the value, because that's why so many of us maybe moved here or love here, or fall in love with the springs, or understand their cultural significance for the state of Florida, and understand ultimately they are, as your guest said, or your person just called in, they are the recharge for the aquifer, the very drinking water for 21 million people in the state of Florida or in the Southeast. So the idea that we're not connected with the aquifer is really problematic. All of us need to get educated on that. We all need, either from school children on up, they teach it in the Fort White schools. They have this whole program called the Partnership, where they teach kids in the Fort White school program how they're connected to their water resources. It's a brilliant thing. And all the kids go through it in the whole school, and it's been going on for 15 years or whatever. And so the kids here get it. They understand the springs. It's the rest of us that live around Florida that do whatever they do. They have their houses, they drive back and forth to work, that don't understand that all the water they're using, all the impacts they're making to their land, ends up in the waterways, whether it's on the Caloosahatchee, or whether it's on the Withlacoochee, or whether it's on the Santa Fe. And we all have to get on board with that. We have to do drastic differences, and that's, people just don't want to do the drastic stuff, and they have to, because that's where we're at right now. We're at critical mass. And 10 to 20 years, that's what I give them. And I don't want to be such a downer, but I watch it every day. I see the changes. I've been seeing them since I moved here in 2002. They've changed. Not getting better. Like you said, first magnitudes. There were 9 or 10, and now we have none. They still have them on the books. The government does as a first magnitude. You'll see them written that way, and we are like, it's not a first magnitude. That's not flowing like that. But they're trying to protect them. I get that they're trying to protect them in namesake only, but in action, it's not happening.
Our guest is Merrillee Malwitz-Jipson, a board member with the group Our Santa Fe River. We're talking about Florida's freshwater springs, about bottled water, about pollution, about water in Florida. And you can join the conversation by calling 813-239-9663. Have a couple people on the line. We'll get to you in just a minute, Charlie. You can text us at 813-433-0885, or you can email dj@wmnf.org. And I'm going to read this text from Joanne, who is mentioning something that you briefly mentioned just a moment ago. River traces. What are river traces, and what impact does development have on homeowners? River traces. What are they, Merrillee?
Yeah. So in North Florida, and probably everywhere, there are underground water systems, conduits that act as rivers. And they have very designated areas where you can actually go to these places and go all the way down to the basin of where these channels are. And under there, where today they are ground, they will act as ground. They're not even wet at the top, but under there, they're water systems. And they used to be waterways that would actually surface on the top. You would see them on the top. I mean, we're talking probably hundreds of years, 100 to 100 couple of years ago, maybe not even. Anyway, so these traces are what are underground water systems, underground riverways. And we have the Ichetucknee Trace. We have a Santa Fe River Trace. We call it Paradise Valley Trace that connects to the Santa Fe. There's quite a few traces on the Santa Fe, quite a few traces on the Ichetucknee. Wherever there are spring systems, the Withlacoochee, the Swanee, frequently you're going to have these underground river systems. And as you drive through the landscape, you can certainly identify with them. You're driving along, and then all of a sudden the land will go down all the way down to a bottom. And at the very bottom, you might see off your road metal railings. If you're seeing metal railings off the road, it's because it's even lower on the other side of the roads. And those are the places where there's sinkholes, where there's traces, where there's underground connections to the aquifer and ultimately the surface water. And ultimately that moves as a water mass in a certain direction. And you follow the direction, and it usually ends up in a spring, usually. And up here anyway, yeah.
Well, thank you, Joanne, for that question. And I also want to ask this. Pete in Indian Shores, which is near the Gulf Coast in Pinellas County, says, do you have any idea how many underground aquifers there are in Pinellas County?
You are connected to the Floridan aquifer. One.
All right. Thank you, Merrillee. And we have Charlie's been waiting on the line a while, so let's go to Charlie in New Tampa. Hi, Charlie. Welcome to the show.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Doing great.
Yeah, I was on the Rainbow River this weekend. I've been going on that river for 50 years. And one thing that I'm appalled about is the overusage with the commercial scuba kayak companies. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of people in such a small area. And I wanted to know, who's getting paid? Are they paying the state? Are they paying the KP hole? You know, how there's money being made, but where's it going?
All right. Thank you for the question, Charlie.
I can talk to that as an outfitter. While I am a board member with our Santa Fe River, I am an outfitter in the Santa Fe River Basin. And I mostly just outfit the Santa Fe when people go there. As far as Rainbow River, the inside park vendor who is renting out equipment does pay the state. There's a contract with the state. You are allowed to request that contract. You're allowed to question that contract because it is a state, Rainbow River is a state park. And so there are no regulations for owning an outfitter. There's actually no rules either. You have the outfitter themselves are kind of self-regulated. My business is a little different, as probably some people know. We don't run hard, we run really soft. We don't want to be crowding the river, and we give the river a rest when we think, you know, we need to or whatever. And there's weekends where it can get pretty crowded on the Santa Fe too. Lately, what they're trying to do is the state, through legislative intent, is create a springs protection zone. So the springs protection zone would be no mooring, anchoring, or beaching. And there might be another one in there. And Florida Wildlife Commission is the one that's responsible for maintaining this new regulation. And so they would have to enforce it. And so on the Weeki Wachee, which is kind of near the Rainbow River, and also at Nichols Springs, which is off the Withlacoochee, the Withlacoochee near the Weeki Wachee area, not the northern Withlacoochee. There's two in the state of Florida. Anyway, the intent there is at Nichols Springs became the first springs protection zone in the state of Florida. We have to start somewhere. It's just a little cove entryway. It's a really small spring, but the owner of that property that surrounds the spring is the one that pursued it, even though he tried to, or the family members of the owner, they tried to keep it quiet on the lowdown because it was former Senator Dean, that actually was the one that pursued this with his family that now owns this property that surrounds the spring. It was his. And so they got it. They got an SPZ, no mooring, anchoring, or beaching. So no one that can come in there with a motorboat or a kayak and do anything in the spring. They can pass through it. They can look at the spring, but they can't stay. So, and they can't stand in the water, can't stand in the sand. And what we're seeing here in terms of recreational use is we're seeing a lot of silting. Silting is the biggest damage to, I think, in terms of recreational use. And silting can be a lot of different things. It can be the mooring, anchoring, and beaching. It can be getting out of your vessel. It can be swimming. It can be flipping your fins, and it can be jet skis that cause just a tremendous harm on the Santa Fe River. The erosion that we're seeing from jet skis and wave runners is shocking. They don't know what the damage they're doing. They come here thinking it's so fast to go fast. Oh, fast through these winding rivers where there's kayakers and canoers and floaters and swimmers and divers on the other side of a blind pass. And you have these tremendous wakes and people driving super fast through these small river channels. So we're definitely seeing an impact to all recreational use on these freshwater systems, not the beaches, of course, we're talking about freshwater systems. And so there needs to be some rules and regulations. Even as an outfitter, I see that. Even as an outfitter, I see use that is quite alarming. The rivers can't handle the kind of use that we're giving them. Staying in your boat, we tell our customers lately to stay in your boat. Don't get out. I mean, you can go to swimming designated areas and you can get out there and swim there. There's designated swimming areas. But as far as just getting out anywhere on the water, we're trying to discourage that, because even your footprint, you get out and you step around and you're stepping, that'll stay there for the longest time until we get a flood. That footprint will stay there. So the impacts that we're seeing, and everybody wants to do stuff on the river. It's really a hard one. It's a tough one. It's a dilemma of the commons, honestly. You got people that own land and riverfront people, and then you got people that don't and want to have access. And then you have parks that are trying to charge money for the access when they used to be free. So it's a conundrum, and I think it's definitely worth having more discussions about how do we limit the amount of humans that are recreating on these waterways just to protect them, y'all. It's just about protection. It's not about anything. It's not about money even. It's just about maintaining those natural systems so the next generation can also equally enjoy them.
Our guest is Merrillee Malwitz-Jipson, a board member with the group Our Santa Fe River. We're talking about Florida Springs here on WMNF's Tuesday Cafe. It's 10:52 in the morning. I'm Seán Kinane, and we have another caller, Lenny in St. Pete. Hi, Lenny. What would you like to say?
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So, well, thank you for this program. And I think in general, the problem is that the very short-sightedness of people not understanding the impacts that they're causing. And the paradox is that people are attracted to Florida because of its natural wonders. And of course, the more people we come in, the more damage it's done as people want to use those resources. And eventually, when the waterways turn into mud holes and dry up, then people realize that how precious this is, and it's gone. And now their valuable properties are going to be worthless. So we're creating in the future, kind of like a death spiral. So,
all right, thank you, Lenny.
Yeah, we're Lenny and others. That's where the Springs funding comes in. Governor DeSantis, who's ready to give $75 million to Springs restoration projects, and they're interesting. You know, some of them are land purchases, some of them are wastewater to our sewer to wastewater infrastructure projects, which we do all have to get on a communal system versus having these septic systems that are out in the middle of nowhere doing God only knows what. So yeah, it's important that we do get the funding for these projects, but they can't be the Band-Aid fixes. We can't be just throwing umpteen millions of dollars at these devastating impacts that we've created by human development to restore whatever that needs to be restored. We need to get on the front side of that and stop it at the beginning, or at least educate. I think it's all in education. Our Santa Fe River, we're really tied to that right now. We want to meet with realtors. We want to meet with developers. We want to meet with the institutions that we see are the damages right now. We see human development, as one of the biggest problems for the Florida Springs. And so if we can maybe sit and meet with them and talk about the situations and explain to them all of this incredible knowledge that, like I said, the Florida Springs Institute puts out, or these books about the springs. There's so many different great information about springs. Sit down and explain, hey, you're going to build this thing right on top of an underground water system. And we know because we have LIDAR, or we have some sort of advanced technology to show you that there's water under there, even though you don't see it with your own eyes. So lots of education's involved, and throwing money at it isn't, for restoration projects is not, it's not sustainable.
Our guest is Merrillee Malwitz-Jipson with Our Santa Fe River. And an example of one of the statewide springs projects that did get state money was that the Southwest Florida Water Management District got $10 million for the South Highlands Septic to Sewer project designed to benefit the Chassahowitzka-Homosassa Springs Basin. And they're going to remove from service a minimum of 69 residential septic tanks in the city of Inverness South service area. So converting septic to sewer. That's one of the ways that this money is going to go to protect springs. Let me read this email.
So they can build more, Sean. That's so they can build more houses. So again, front side, it's not necessarily building more houses that we need, even though we need the conversions. We need to stop building the way we're building.
We have an email here from Alyssa in Gulfport, and she's going back to the bottled water conversation that we were having earlier. She says, please remind people that plastic is an oil and chemical based on production's process. So chemical residue is in all bottled water. So any thoughts on what Alyssa is adding to our bottled water conversation?
She's right. She's right about that. And they degrade as they sit there on the shelf with the water in there, the degradation that does happen, and the petrochemicals that do end up, somehow molecularly coming into your drinking water stream as you drink. And the other thing, it is a petrochemical industry. Plastics is a petrochemical. And I have mentioned, and I'll mention it here, I think there does need to be a class action lawsuit on petrochemical industries, such as Dow, or such as the ones that were early devising this scheme to make everything packaged so that you can have it in a package to take home. I mean, these are all relatively new in the past 40 or 50 years on the planet, and look at what we've gotten to as a result of those industries. I think those industries need to be smashed. I think we're in a whole new day and age where we know what the problems are. Why are we still allowing companies like that to exist in the way that they are existing, to polluting our planet, our entire planet, our water stream, the things we consume? We're consuming microplastics. That if you can't get a class action lawsuit sooner than later, I don't know what's worse, smoking or plastics. They got it with smoking. Why can't we get that going with plastics? Because we should send all our plastics that we consume, if we do any, back to the business that we bought it from. Here you go.
Let's see if we can get one more phone call in. Tommy from St. Pete's. Can you turn off your radio, Tommy? And what would you like to say?
You'll
have to turn off your radio unless I'm getting interference. All right, I'm getting some interference. Go ahead and say what you have to say, but very quickly, please.
I spent holidays in the Kissimmee area, Orlando area, and dealt with a lot of right-wing family relatives that all complain about how bad the traffic is up there, and they keep on voting in these Republican governors who have just allowed unfettered growth with no infrastructure put in. And they wonder why everything is so busy in Florida, and why all these people complain about the way things are in Florida, but keep on voting the same people in who make the things in Florida bad.
All right. Thank you very much, Tommy, for that point. Merrillee, is that something you'd like to weigh in on?
Yeah, politics. I'm going to pass on the politics weighing in on, and it's systemic. I would say that not the politics, of course, but the idea that it's just one person or one cabinet or something. It's systemic. We lost the Department of Community Affairs. That's more important. That Department of Community Affairs, Governor Scott took out when he first got into office that very day. I was there when it happened. It was very bizarre. And so that department was critical for development, because they had the expertise when small rural communities or smaller communities that couldn't afford the expertise, they could go to them with these plans from developers and say, hey, can you do this? Can we do this here? Can we put this right here in the center of town or wherever it is or on top of this? And so those experts were critical to give cities and municipalities or counties and cities, I should say, the good stuff, the good things that need to be there. And we need that back. We need the Department of Community Affairs back.
Well, I want to thank you so very much for joining us on WMNF's Tuesday Cafe, Merrillee.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me. I hope it's a great 2023 year, and I hope everybody does get outside and see nature.
Thank you. Keep us posted on what happens with the springs. Merrillee Malwitz-Jipson is a board member with Our Santa Fe River